Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're tracing a massive food safety failure to understand exactly how a simple, everyday salad triggered a nationwide crisis. We're looking at a situation where a major food company, international borders, federal regulations, and yes, even campaign finances all collided to create the perfect storm. It's a story that starts right in your local produce aisle but goes all the way to Washington, so let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into this jarring figure right away. Nearly 14,000. That is how many Americans were sickened in this outbreak. We're not talking about a handful of isolated incidents here. This highlights the absolute massive scale of the threat that was literally sitting right in our refrigerators. We rely on the safety of our food supply every single day, right? So an outbreak of this magnitude really forces us to ask, how could something so routine go so dangerously wrong for so many people?
Let's start with part one. The lettuce outbreak, or what we can call the surface layer.
Now, this immediate crisis affected consumers across 17 different states and tragically resulted in 2 deaths in Michigan. But here's the crucial thing you need to understand. The culprit? Cyclospora. This isn't your standard run-of-the-mill food poisoning. It is a silent, microscopic parasite that completely evades normal safety checks. It just doesn't show up on the routine tests our food system relies on. And if you consume it, you aren't just feeling sick for a day or two. You're looking at severe nausea, extreme fatigue, and serious digestive distress that can last for weeks. That's what makes this particular parasite so insidious. It turns fresh, healthy iceberg lettuce into a totally hidden danger.
Moving deeper, we have part 2, tracing the contamination, which brings us to our first big reveal. Just look at this timeline. It brilliantly and honestly kind of terrifyingly illustrates the alarming delay and absolute chaos of the situation. People started getting sick in May, but it actually took until July 17th for Taylor Farms to issue a voluntary recall of their lettuce. Think about that, months of exposure. Then, the very next day, July 18th, the FDA officially links the outbreak to a Taylor Farms processing plant in Mexico and announces a positive test for the parasite. But wait, on July 19th, the FDA retracts that result, calling it a false positive. Imagine being a consumer at that exact moment. You've got salads in your fridge, people are getting severely ill all over the country, and the federal agency in charge of keeping you safe retracts its own smoking gun. This back and forth caused massive delays in public warnings and left millions totally unsure if their food was actually safe to eat.
Which brings us to part 3, the inspection gap. This exposes a massive structural flaw.
Now, at the center of this structural flaw is the Taylor Farms Mexico facility in Guanajuato. And get this, that facility hadn't seen a single FDA inspector since 2019. That is years of zero physical oversight. What's really wild here is the sheer disparity between the FDA's stated safety goals and what they actually did. Their target for 2025 was 19,200 foreign inspections. But what did they actually achieve? Barely 1,100. The agency points the finger at strict budget constraints and severe staffing shortages. But whatever the reason, those numbers represent a glaring, gaping vulnerability in the shield that's supposed to protect the American food supply.
And this inspection gap? It's even more concerning when you consider how heavily we rely on these suppliers. Over 20% of all U.S. food imports, representing more than $16 billion, come from Mexico. We have an undeniable, heavy reliance on these imports. Yet the agency responsible for monitoring them simply doesn't have the boots on the ground to prioritize inspecting this foreign produce.
I read this quote from an industry analyst, and it literally hits the nail on the head. Investigators now believe that the contamination started with agricultural water. But, as the quote points out, without uniform certification requiring foreign suppliers to actually prove their irrigation water is safe, and without routine, unannounced inspections from our end, we're essentially trusting foreign suppliers to police themselves. That's not oversight. That is an honor system for our fresh produce. And it makes us highly vulnerable to exactly this type of contamination. It's not proactive. It's honestly just hoping for the best.
That leads us to part 4, donations and delays, where we look at the root cause.
I want to present this factual timeline completely neutrally so you can just see the sequence of events because it is striking. On March 26, 2025, Taylor Fresh Foods made a $1 million donation to a pro-Trump super PAC. Now, just 6 days later, on April 1st, the FDA announced a delay in enforcing a critical new regulation known as the Food Traceability Rule. And they didn't just delay it by a few weeks, they delayed it by a whopping 30 months. Why does that matter? Well, this specific rule would have required much faster, more rigorous tracking of contaminated produce. It's something that could have potentially cut weeks off the response time for this very outbreak.
But the story doesn't end there. Taylor Fresh Foods subsequently donated an additional $100,000 to another aligned PAC. These actions have actually triggered Senator Elizabeth Warren to launch an investigation to figure out if these political donations directly influence the FDA's decision to delay that crucial traceability rule. On top of that, reports have surfaced suggesting that Taylor Farms actively lobbied behind the scenes to postpone the public recall announcement entirely, specifically to give themselves time to clear out their existing inventory. Ultimately, this resulted in a critical 2-week gap. That's a 2-week window where the FDA knew the likely source of the parasite, but the public was not fully warned. During that crucial time, contaminated lettuce just continued to be sold and consumed.
Representative Robert Garcia really encapsulated the deep political tension right now. He asked why this delay was so convenient for a company that just gave $1 million to the administration. When health regulations intersect with massive political donations like this, it raises serious questions that can fundamentally undermine public trust in the very systems designed to keep us safe.
Finally, we reach Part 5, the human cost and the path forward.
To put our current defenses into perspective, take a look at this. The CDC's parasitic division, literally the exact people whose job it is to trace and combat outbreaks like Cyclospora, used to have 11 staff members. Today, that number has been slashed to just 3. 3 people to manage the entire nation's defense against complex parasitic threats. It really shows how drastic cuts to public health make it incredibly difficult for our agencies to effectively track, manage, and respond to future outbreaks.
Because behind all the data and the politics, the human cost here is heavy. Thousands were hospitalized, 2 people tragically lost their lives, and many survivors are still facing lingering fatigue and digestive issues months later. Now, the FDA maintains that the contaminated lettuce is off the shelves and it's currently safe to eat salads again, but they've also admitted they desperately need to rebuild their foreign inspection capacity. Because of this massive failure, there are growing calls for an independent National Foodborne Outbreak Investigation Board. Think of it like the NTSB, but for food instead of plane crashes, a body that can act quickly and independently of any political or corporate pressure. Because experts agree, until we fix lax oversight and implement true traceability, another systemic failure isn't just possible, it's practically inevitable.
This outbreak really exposed a broken system, highlighting how vulnerable we all are when profits, politics, and a lack of oversight intersect. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a crucial question to keep in mind the next time you're walking down the produce aisle. Do you know where your salad came from? Thank you so much for joining me. Stay informed, stay curious, and stay safe out there.